Hello and welcome to another training video. Today we're going to be taking a look at data modeling within Excel primarily, and some of the questions you should ask yourself before you even start. So let's have a look at Excel. So when we're talking about data modeling, we don't just dive straight into it and show some stuff as we're sometimes asked to do. What we should always do is ask ourselves, first of all, what is the question I'm trying to answer? Now, this is not always obvious, especially to the people who ask you to do some analysis and show them some stuff, but it is something that you should always press, because if you don't know what question you're trying to answer, you're really not sure what you're looking for and not sure what you're trying to show, and not sure if in fact you're just wasting your time. So that's actually the most important question before you start any form of data modeling. The next question should be, when is the answer needed by? Most of the time you're going to be displaying some data which will inform a business decision, and there's absolutely no point in presenting that data a day after the decision has had to be taken. So this is just as important as the first question, because it will drive how long you spend working on the data. Then you can start asking, where is the relevant data? So where is it stored? In what form is it stored? What format? How can you get access to it? Do you need special permissions to get access to it? And so on. And then the next couple of questions related to where is the data. The first one I generally look at is, how bad is it? Now, I've yet to find a set of data which is what I would call good data. It's almost always stored in multiple disparate formats with extra data inside there, unnecessary data, or missing vital data within a file. It's often also stored in lots of different locations as well as different formats. So the first question is, how bad is it? And then related to that is, what do I need to do to fix it? Is it possible to fix, or do I need to create extra data sets in order to work with? Okay, so once we've answered those questions, we then start saying, are there any related files? So our data tends to be in two different types of file. Now what I mean by that is you have records of things that happened, events. Now these are quite often related to or referred to as fact tables, because they are things that happened. Now an easy way to identify these is they should always have a timestamp on them, because a fact is something that happened at a point in time. So if your data doesn't have a timestamp on it, it's either bad data or it's not fact data. So what I mean here by related files is, are there other files which are, or other data stored in different files which are not the main fact file but are related to it? And I'll show you examples of this in a minute. And these would be your lookup or your dimension tables or your dimension files. And only when we've got all of these above things are we now ready to get started working. So okay, let's imagine we do have all of these. So the question we're trying to answer, and this would be for a supermarket, is which items or categories of items sell first thing in the morning, so that our staff who come in overnight to stock the shelves, what should they be working on so that they've absolutely got that ready to go first thing in the morning, and the stuff that sells later in the afternoon, well, if we haven't finished stacking those shelves, it doesn't matter because we can be doing them during the day. So that's our business question. When do we need the answer by? Well, it's not urgent, but it will inform an HR meeting or a store meeting at the end of the month. So I need to present this in sufficient time to allow the person who's going to be making the decision enough time to analyze it and look at it and see what decisions they can make based on the results I give them. So I don't just present it at the meeting where the decision is being taken, I present it in sufficient time before then to the person who it's related to. So I can see down here that it's the 19th of the month so far. If the meeting is at the end of the month, I would generally try to use 1/3 of the time that's available, and thereby leaving 2/3 of the time for the next person in the chain. Wherever possible, that's my outside limit. I'll try and do it quicker than that if possible. Okay, so let's jump onto sheet 2 in this file. Now, I'm just going to minimize this and we'll have a look at where our data is. So I have some transactions data, and in here you'll notice that I have data 2015, data 2016, 17, 18, and I also just have the single files. Now these ones are the ones I don't want. I actually want the ones that begin with data, but I also have other file types in this folder, and I also have some of the files with the wrong extension or the wrong format for the extension. So we're going to fix all of that as part of our query and modeling. So let's just take a look at one of these files first of all. So I've opened that up, and you'll see that in there this does have a timestamp. So I could confidently assume that this is my fact data, and it is. These are my facts that at that point in time, with this till and this cashier, this product, 18 of them went through the till at that point in time. Here's a customer ID, payment type, and a transaction ID which would relate to the invoice number, and you'll notice that there's a whole group of these together, all with the same details, because that's a single invoice or a single transaction effectively, rather than a single item. So single transaction rather than a single item. We also have the store ID number on the right hand side. Now earlier I talked about related tables or lookup tables. Now we're going to need one of these here because I just have my product ID, and what I don't want to do is create some kind of VLOOKUP here to try and find the product category from that product ID. Well, I certainly don't want to do it in this file, because then I will end up with as many VLOOKUPs as I have rows of data, which in this case would be tens of thousands, but in the actual data set would have been about 400 million rows of data over the 5 years, because this was a national supermarket chain, and they sell quite a lot of items. So you certainly don't want that many VLOOKUPs within your data. And this is why the data is stored in this manner, because the product ID is a 5-digit number, and that uses much less memory than the actual product description, which might be 30 or 40 characters of text. In other words, 30 or 40 characters with 128 different options for each one, rather than 5 characters with only 10 options for each one. So much smaller amount of memory to record the product ID rather than a product description. However, elsewhere I do have a product table which I can use for a lookup. So I'm going to close this one down, and actually no I'm not, I'm just simply going to clear that off this sheet, and let me now have a look at a different one. So in fact now I will close that one down, and let me just have a look at a different one from there. So I have my, up one level, and here I have various different tables that I could use for this example, and one of them is called products, and here are the product IDs, and I can get a category and an actual item description as well. In addition to that, I get pack quantities and pack prices, which may be useful, but that will be for a different question that's being asked. For this particular question that's being asked, all I actually want is the food category from the related product ID. Okay, well let's have a look at how we would use these. So the first thing we need to do is we need to load them in. So this is called getting data, and from Excel we do it from the data ribbon and get and transform the data. So I'm going to say get, and the first thing I'm going to do is say from file, from workbook, and I'm going to find that products table. Now this is opening up from an Excel file, and within the Excel file there are multiple different tables. The table products is the one I want. Now I'm going to straight away say load and load to. Now I don't necessarily want this on my sheet, so I'm just going to create a connection and add it to my data model and click OK. You'll notice the query appears on the right hand side, and this is my lookup table or my dimension table, and it could be one of many. I'm now going to get the facts. So the facts, I'm going to get them from a folder rather than a file. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say get all of those CSV files in that same folder, and then I'm going to say, but I don't want all of the CSV files, I just want the ones that begin with data. So I'm going to scroll down here, it's transactions 2015 to 18, click OK, and OK again. Now this time I'm going to transform the data, because what you see here is actually just the metadata for each of those individual files in that folder. So I'm going to transform the data, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say I just want the ones that begin with, or that have the file extension CSV, but some of these have uppercase CSV, some of them have lowercase CSV. So I'm going to fix that first of all. I right click and I say transform, and I have them all in lowercase. Now that's a step that I pretty much do even if it's not been done wrong so far, because this query will also work on any files that are put in that folder in the future. So what I'm trying to do is make my query as robust and idiot-proof as possible, particularly where there are common mistakes that I know might be made when people store the data. So the next thing I want to do is I want to just have the CSV ones. Now again, to try and make it idiot-proof, I'm not just going to untick XLSM and just have the CSV selected there. I'm going to do a text filter equals, and now I'm going to choose the CSV from the drop-down. That means there's no danger of me doing a typo or anything like that, and it also means this is future-proof and idiot-proof as much as it can be. Click OK. Now what I want to do is I want to choose from here the ones that begin with data. So I'm going to go to the name, I'm going to do a text filter, and I'm going to say begins with, and I'm going to say data. Now when I click OK, it's now filtered it to show me just the ones that begin with data and have the lowercase CSV extension. Now even though this one has an uppercase CSV, I filtered by the CSV with them looking at it as if it was lowercase. Now I don't want to do any more to the metadata, so now I actually want to look at the content. So I'm going to go to content, right click and remove other columns. Now they haven't been removed, they've simply been taken out of this view, which is my query. So I'm going to now click on that button there to join them all together. So this will join all of those different files together into a single file, putting them in the correct column order. So now I will have all of my data from all of these 2015, 16, 17, 18, plus any files that are in future loaded into this folder when I refresh my query. So this is just showing me a sample based on the first couple of 100 rows, because I certainly don't want it to analyze 500 million rows. I'm going to click OK, happy with that, and it's still staying within the query, and it's going to come up and show me what it would look like with all those joined together. But again, it's just showing me a sample, it's not showing me everything within that whole folder. Now there's a couple of other things I want to do here, because I want to do this by time of day. So from that time column, what I'm going to do is add an extra column. Now this doesn't add any extra data, because all it is another view of the same data. This is the data that's stored there already. I'm simply adding a column which is another way of looking at that column of data. So I'm going to go to add column, and I'm going to choose the time, and I'm going to say hour, and it goes furthest on the right. Now I can right click here and say move to the beginning, and that will jump all the way back to the beginning of the data. Now I can also click and drag to reposition it, so I can position it so that it's the second item in my data should I so require. Okay, that's actually all I want to do here, but I do need to find out some information based upon the product ID, but that's not in this file, that's in a different file. So I can't do that here in this particular query. So now I'm going to say close and load. I don't need to do close and load 2 because my default settings are that it will create a connection and add to the data model. So if I'd just done close and load, it would have done those anyway. I now have my 2 different queries, and one of them only has 5,000 rows, that's my different products, and another one has 43,000. As I said, this is a massively simplified set of data, and the original had something over 400 million rows of data within those 4 years. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to link these 2 tables together, and we're going to do that in the data model. Now this is often referred to as the Power Pivot window. Power Pivot is the old name for this, even though it still says Power Pivot at the top. This is the data model, and this is where we manage how the files relate to each other and any measures or calculated columns that we may require. So here what I can do is I can look at these and I can say, well, these are my facts. So I generally put the facts in the middle. And this is a lookup, so I'll put the lookups around the outside, normally in a circular configuration around the outside, and this is what's called a star schema. Everything from my lookup will be related in some way to something in my fact table. If I don't have something that can be related directly, then I should actually look at how I can make that so that it does relate directly. Okay, so I've now created a relationship between this and this. So let's imagine in here at a certain time of day I had a product ID. What I could now do is look across here and find the description or the category of that particular product ID. So let's go back to the data view, and on my transactions what I can do is add a column here. And if I add the column, what I could do is say find me the related product ID. But again, what that will do is it will then hard code in an extra item for every single one of all of these rows of data. Now you very definitely don't want to do this on your fact table, because the fact table is the one that has a lot of records. So you may want to do that adding columns onto your lookup table because it's much smaller, but you almost never want to do this on your fact table. There are better ways of doing this, and the best way is through pivots. So let's just create a pivot table, and this is now creating something called Power Pivot, and I'm going to put it on this existing worksheet and click OK. Now because I'm in an empty cell rather than a cell within a range of data, it will default straight away to the data model pivot table, which means that I can use any of the fields or tables that are within my data model, and you see the little database sign in the corner. That means these are data model options. If I was working on tables within my file, I would also have those tables down here with the table icon. So it does matter which one you use, because the ones with just the table icon do not have any relationships between them. So here we have the one with the relationships between them because we set up the relationships in the data model. And what I can now do is go to my transactions, and let's have a look at them by hour. So if I put the columns which show the hour of day running across there, and then if I put my quantity in the values, what I see is I see the sum of quantity. So this is telling me how many items were sold at different times of day. And now I can choose a field from another table and say, let's have a look at the food category. So now I can see a breakdown of these different items at different times of the day. Now, most of the time you don't want to see this as you're seeing it here. In other words, as a table, pivoted or not. Most of the time we'd want to see this as a chart. So I click on Pivot Chart, and let's just jump straight into that one. And let's go back in and just switch the rows and columns, just so that it gives us the time of day, and then we can see within the legend or the key, we can see what these different items are. And so what this is telling me is that quite clearly I've got two things which stand out first thing in the morning. I've got my refrigerated foods, and I've got bakery, breakfast and cereal. So these are significantly more in these first 2 hours of the day than they are elsewhere. I've also got quite a high demand on my canned and packaged foods, so I should probably make sure that those areas are stocked as well first thing in the morning. So that was just a very simple look at a data model, and just to demonstrate that there's a lot more to think about when you're modeling your data rather than just the data. The most important thing to think about is what is the question that you're trying to answer. Then you go and look for the data, then you try and fix the data, fix any problems in it, and relate it to other data sources as well. Once you've done all of that, you can then do some very quick analysis using pivot tables and pivot charts, put on different slicers as you please, and then you get your answer. Okay, if this has been useful for you, don't forget to like and subscribe down below, and if you have any questions, do just put them in the comments, and I hope that's been useful for you, and thank you for listening.